Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have made it to Unit 3, which is a little bit of an extension of Unit 1, and we'll be talking about our trig identities. So first and foremost, I'm going to be reviewing some of the identities that we talked about in Unit 1, and then we will build on these identities. So this is going to go a little bit faster than normal because you have seen these before. So trig functions have numerous relationships that can be expressed as what's known as an identity. And by definition, an identity is an equation that is true for all values of the variables for which every term of the equation is defined. So typically, angles are written as either x, or we've seen them as theta. Then we have an alpha and a beta, which we have yet to use. But what you need to know is that any variable can be used. So we've gone through multiple identities, and it's important that you memorize these because we're going to need these as we go through to verify these trig identities. So we talked about the reciprocal identity, which is known, you can write it shorter as the recip ID. Okay, and basically what we did was we talked about which functions were reciprocals of which. So the sine is the reciprocal 1 over the cosecant of x. So the cosecant would be 1 over the sine of x. Cosine is 1 over the secant, and secant is 1 over the cosine. Tangent, 1 over cotangent. Cotangent, 1 over the tangent. Okay, so we did talk about all of these, and what you need to remember is that any powers are valid for reciprocal identities, meaning if I give you the sine of x squared, you could interchangeably use 1 over the cosecant of x squared. Okay, it's the same thing, or this could be written as the sine squared of x. These are the same thing. 1 over the cosecant squared of x. So this is just something that you need to keep in mind because all of these are to the first power. One thing also that you need to make note of is that equivalent notations for higher powers, the sine of x squared is the same thing as a sine squared of x, but this is not equal to the sine of x squared. Okay, so here the x is squared, here the trig function is squared. Our second identity that we talked about was the quotient identity. And in short, you could write it as the quote ID. And this was, the tangent is, as a quotient, you're dividing two trig functions. So this would be the sine over the cosine. So this is a quotient, not a reciprocal. And this is the cosine over the sine. And again, any powers are valid for these quotient identities. So I could say, I don't know, cotangent to the fourth of x is the same thing as the cosine to the fourth of x over the sine to the fourth. Or I could say tangent squared is sine squared over cosine squared. Okay, so we have already dealt with these.